Okay, nice. I call upon Prime Minister to open up debate. Here, here.
Okay, I'll take POIs in chat, please. Gray hacking in the status quo is an unfair circumstance where corporations contract individuals for their services and punish them unjustly by manipulating the hammer of justice. Let's do a few pieces of setup at the top of this speech, then I'll talk about two things. Firstly, why this increases cybersecurity and causes people to turn away from traditional hacking. Secondly, about the principle of fairness. But firstly, a few pieces of setup. I think an important thing to observe then is that this is going to be crucially determined by courts in case in which there is conflict that occurs. So what this means then is that there's still going to be some form of accountability, not just on behalf of the corporation or the firm or whoever's contracting the service, but also on behalf of the gray hacker as well. So this means that this probably preempts any opposition claims about why the hacker can engage in like foul play, or for example, like you can ensure they didn't breach the system unfairly or more than the corporation would have intended. But under the court system, they can probably demand things like some degree of information or transparency on behalf of the hacker, which means that you can deter foul play on either from both parties. But the second thing to observe in setup then is that under the court system, we're probably going to have like pre-existing guidelines that the state is going to set up in the first place about what is or is not acceptable under a variety of circumstances. But also as the court continues to try more and more cases, this also sets precedents throughout the process of trying more cases, which also standardizes the process in the long term as well. 2 points. First, let's begin by explaining why this causes individual gray hackers who could potentially become like real problematic hackers to turn away from that type of traditional hacking, or it causes existing traditional hackers to turn away from that and to become gray hackers instead. So here are the incentives as to why people, especially hackers, have incentives to pursue legal avenues if given these options, even when they have the option of, for example, doing something like hacking traditionally. I think the first main incentive that people have to do this is that there's still some risks that are involved with traditional hacking. Hacking, especially, always has the risk of being done imprecisely or imperfectly. So, systems and softwares are incredibly complex things. There's always the risk that it's going to be traced back to, or going to be caught in some capacity. But even if this risk is small, I suggest that it's still something that consistently weighs down on the minds of individuals. It's an emotional burden and a fear that you have on a day-to-day. So even if the risk was small, which I don't even think it necessarily is, because many hackers are not like perfect top tier, like perfect, like brilliant geniuses, but at the very least, you have the incentive to want to live a more comfortable and stable lifestyle to avoid the emotional damage that comes with, fearing that one day you're going to be caught on a day-to-day basis. But the second incentive that exists is one of publicity, or when you can be public about your job and talk
Hi, is it just me
Yeah,
or did
frozen for me as well.
It's frozen for us too.
okay, okay, Pri Prime Minister, I think your connection died. DPM, can you contact your partner?
Yeah, we'll
Hold
do.
on. I, s- I stopped the timer at about 2:30.
All right, I'm gonna move on to my second mechanism about publicity, because when you as a hacker can now be open about the profession that you have and the jobs that you do, what this means then is it can start to build clientele. You can build a portfolio and reach out to other people and slowly begin to get more and more clients by broadcasting the past work that you had done and the success you had there. And this is not something you can do, obviously, when the nature of your job is something that would like get you sued in court or get you thrown in jail. This means then is that uniquely when you have the capacity to pursue a comparatively more legal profession, you can have greater long-term stability by building a clientele in the future. But the problem then is that you bypass all of these incentives when you do not offer these gray hackers any form of legal protection, because now the risks apply equally, if not significantly more, to gray hacking in the status quo, because you directly expose yourself whenever you talk with the corporation. You say, hey, I am a hacker, this is the work I can do, and you give them all of the grounds to find out who you are, to discover your identity, and the types of like tools you use and the work that you do as well, which directly exposes you to the threat of legal action, which is the very thing you had feared in the very first place. But the change then is that we now directly incentivize people to pursue grey hacking as a profession and to do it more compared to traditional hacking, because now you offer them legal protection, which is an incentive in a couple of ways. Where the most direct way this occurs is that companies are directly disincentivized from suing you because they're more likely to lose because of the laws and protections that are put in place. But at the very least, even if they still sue to some extent, at the very least, the companies know that court cases are going to last significantly longer because these hackers have significantly more legal grounds to stand on, and they have incentives to want to avoid the financial cost of pursuing long and costly, drawn-out court cases, even if they think they can maybe win in the very end, which significantly deters the risks of legal action. But secondly, there's also more incentives on behalf of certainty and transparency, because as court cases progress and as the state just explicitly says what is or is not okay, this also establishes precedents and norms that hackers can go off of to know what is or is not within reasonable bounds of risk, which means that you have a degree of certainty and comfort within yourself, which incentivizes more traditional hacking as well, because you know that you're going to be reasonably safe to have a decent career in something that you're probably pretty good at without fear of legal action. What is the impact of this? I think the most direct impact of this is that you just avoid massive cybersecurity breaches, which are pretty devastating for many individuals, right? It causes either direct economic stability when massive firms and corporations are frozen from ransomware hackers, or even just minor things massive breaches of data that lead to the publicized information of massive amounts of everyday individuals that did not consent to have their information breached in this capacity. All of these are incredible harms to cybersecurity that you can now avoid when you have not only fewer people pursuing traditional hacking, but also more people solving and patching up the problems in these systems that presently exist. That also, by the way, presumably traditional people cannot do so because they're not trained as hackers, which means these people offer unique skill sets, which is why corporations contract them in the very first place. So with that being said, a second point, let's talk briefly about the principle that exists before that a point from closing, ideally.
Yeah, if it is true that hackers want to take the quote-unquote legal path, then is it not true that those who might become gray hat hackers in your role are in the status quo, simply white hat hackers or cybersecurity contractors, in other words?
So we explained why they have currently unique skills, and now when you offer them a better alternative, they can access this better alternative. So secondly, on this principle about fairness, I think that in the status quo, this is a consensual transaction that exists between two parties, the corporation and the gray hacker. And this is because they often have skills that in a vacuum are morally neutral. So maybe op can be oh, hacking is a bad skill, but obviously skills are morally good or bad depending on their usage. Lockpicking is a valid skill in the status quo that is currently legal. But the crucial thing to note then is that you're not providing a service in which both parties consent to this transaction, and obviously the corporation has promised to not take legal action against them, otherwise they wouldn't have agreed to do this job in the very first place. But then when you do actually pursue legal action against them, you're therefore breaching this consent by taking them to court and suing them and allowing them to be successfully sued because there's no protection in the status quo. This constitutes a form of exploitation and a breach of consent, and we think people should have the rights to engage in these sorts of transactions and not have their consent breached in this way, which is a violation of their dignity. I know that the state has an obligation to protect their citizens in this way, where systems that in the status quo, for example, tort law right now, is an instance in which the state steps in to defend consumers who are exploited by corporations because they did not receive what they had bargained for in a transaction that was supposed to be fair and consensual in this capacity. And notice standardization also feeds into this principle, right? Because when you have more standardization and you have more precedent that is set, this also increases transparency, which makes it easier for hackers and also corporations to consent into what they're bargaining for because of the increased standardization and knowledge about what is or is not acceptable, which means you can cross-apply to different actors and know their expectations of what they want from you are going to be the same no matter who you go to, because of the fact that the court standardizes in this way. For all these reasons, we're so proud to propose.
I think so, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I just realized. Thank PM for the speech. Moving on to LO, I just realized I was muted.
One question. Am I audible to everyone and visible, hopefully?
Yes to both.
Thank you. Just one sec. POIs in the chat, please. Three, two, one. OG is uncharitable as to how those transactions, how those conversations or how this idea about grey hacking would start. OG says, yes, hackers would approach a company and say, yes, if you pay us a fee, we're gonna look for some problems in your system, defense system or something. That's not really what the motion says. What is more likely to look like is hackers deciding to hack a company for the reasons I'm going to outline to you in a sec, realizing that there is a mistake, there is a problem breaching the security systems of, like I say, a company, and then being like, okay, right now I have a choice. If we're on Gov side, I have a choice. Approach the Gov, approach the company, say, hey, we found an error in your security systems. Don't ask us how we got to it or why we got to it, but there is a system. Do you want our help? They have a choice, and the other choice is, of course, I know whatever incentives they have for hacking, blackmailing, being anti-company, wanting other type of benefits, wanting to steal data. This is more likely how this pans out. I don't think, with all respect to OG, I don't think they're extremely charitable to the phrasing of the motion, right? First case, they have now the hackers have an incentive to, quotation marks, fix the software, right? Because most hackers are profit driven. Most hackers already do it not because they dream of a career in software like development and security systems as per CEO's great POI. They have an incentive to do something bad to the company. Regardless if they're like, if we consider them good or bad, their incentive is to disrupt the company in some capacity, to steal data from them, to like endanger them, to blackmail them, whatever. So once again, now they have this choice. If a company agrees to work with them, hackers now still have an incentive to make sure that they fix or like patch the system in a way that like still allows them to retain some control. Because considering that the company or the hackers already know that the internal systems of the company were not enough for hackers to, breach them, or at least have the capacity to breach them, which means hackers know that if they fix the system, they can still make sure that they have, like, I don't know, one pathway if you use a specific code to still get back into that system, right? And the company is not likely to then try to improve their own like IT department, because firstly, they may not have enough money. They did not have enough money to employ good enough contractors in the first place to prevent that hack from happening. Which means now, even if a company agrees to work with the great hackers, they always gonna have to know that there is some group of hackers who have access to their data and probably may use it again and again, right? But now they cannot sue because they accepted the work, they paid the fee, and accepted that this act of hacking wasn't illegal. This is the issue. So companies on their own Gov, there is a possibility that they're going to be held at gunpoint by those hacking groups, because those hacking groups now have protection from the government. When the trade-off is, if you don't accept our help, you cannot really sue us because we're protected by the government, so we have your data. But if you accept our help, we still may have your data and we can pretend to fix the system. There is no guarantee that they will fix the system in the first place, because nobody can fucking cross-check that, because that hacking group was the first one to breach the system in the first place. Second case, it becomes acceptable to try to like hack companies even more, right? Because most companies already may or may not have some issues with their like internal defense, like data protection systems, right? I think this is fair, because those systems, even though they're good, they still are created. They may have some issues, right? So at the point where this becomes legal and people see that hackers now have like protection mechanisms, more people are likely to try to hack more companies. Why is that specifically the case? Because as I explained to you, if hackers want to work for defense companies, they can just go to those want to work for software companies, want to be security contractors, they can just go and approach the company, maybe like, yes, I want to be a security contractor. Here is my portfolio. I know 75 programming languages or whatever. Here, if hackers who do not have like good intentions as per OA, or who do not want to be great hackers, now see, oh, a lot of companies seem to have problems with the defense systems. A lot of companies actually don't have that good of an incentive to, don't have that good of like a defense mechanism. Also, like hackers now can have legal protection, which means hackers can be like, I'm gonna try to look for a loophole with every single fucking company that there exists. So the problem is, errors in data protection systems, which would never be discovered on our side of the house, are being discovered on Go, because more people are aware that more companies potentially have data security, which means more data, possibly vulnerable data of like, clients, individuals, people like us. I'm not into hacking, so people like us, is likely to be jeopardized, because more people are going to try to hack more companies. Now, why this specifically important? Because if you try to hack it and you realize that there is a breach, you can still get to choose as to whether you out yourself, right? So you can continue hacking that company if you found a vulnerability, or once again, as per my mechanization and outframing OG, you can still decide, but it's up to you to decide whether you actually yourself out and confess that you found this breach. which means more data out of more people is likely to be more endangered. Before I come to my last case, CG.
So I don't think you're being very charitable with your characterization either, because I think as OG points out, you can get third-party arbitration and like legal immunity and stuff like that, someone to deal with both sides and represent them fairly.
But you can get that anyway. Like, point is, hackers are hackers because they already exist kind of in a gray zone regardless, i.e., it's their job or their hobby to make sure to find a loophole that doesn't exist. So it doesn't, like, as even if there is litigation, even if third party can, you know, arbitrate and make sure that the agreement looks good, those hackers still have an incentive, or at least some of them still have incentive to make sure that they're not being charitable, because if they fix the system incorrectly so that they still have a way in after the agreement contract has been done, nobody is gonna fucking know. I'm gonna explain to you why nobody's gonna fucking know this. Because this narrative, or allowing this to happen, puts pressure on existing IT structures within those companies. And of course, Gov can say, yes, every company will spend more money to make sure that there is enough security contractors in those companies internally to make sure that those hacks don't happen in general. But not all companies have that money, not all companies have that capacity, which means those hackers still, because of their position on this and their particular skill set, can and probably will have an incentive to make sure that they still have access to that protected data. Lastly, if those people really are incentivized so well and they really care about security protections, as per CEO's great POI, just go into those security companies. Just make sure, like, put yourself out there, present your portfolio, go work for them. Because what this incentivizes is other bad hackers with not such good incentives also taking part in the game, also realizing that there is a possible money or possible data to be stolen or money to be made from those companies. This incentivizes more hacking to happen in general. And at the point where Gov cannot say that companies will magically shield itself from that, they are losing out for those reasons. Oh, well, thank you.
I thank the yellow for that fine speech. Moving on to DPM.
All right, everyone hear me? The reason OO loses this debate is because they don't understand how the computer science sector works at all. Because their statement is the hackers that are hacking hate the companies that are doing it for damage, and they would just get a job in IT. Yeah, the same IT sector that's like down like 30% in jobs in the past 5 years, the same computer science industry that's been crashing and failing and leaving people without a job even when they have university degrees in computer science. A claim we're going to make is simple. The vast majority of hackers are people with computer skills who need to earn money somehow and can't get a job because of an oversaturation of the market. So what they do instead is they start hacking because that's the way they can use their skill set, and they try to make money from it. The question then is, how do they make this money? And we think our policy is the only way to make sure they make that money in a legal, useful way that shores up breaches and stops data breaches, as opposed to propagating them in the first place. 3 things in the speech. First, on OO and explaining why their case is just nonsensical. Secondly, on the counterfactual and why we make sure these hackers engage in better behavior in the vast majority of cases. And finally, on increased cybersecurity and why it matters so much in this debate. First, so OO's top-level observation is right. You hack and then you go to the company and say, aha, I found a breach, will you help me? Sure, our case still completely works in this instance. Like, all of our mechanisms still apply in this case. You just talk to the company after rather than before you hack. All the same things hold true. The question is, which choice do they make? Do they choose to do a data breach? Do they choose to mess with the company? Do they choose to sell that information to other people? Or do they instead go to the company and offer to fix that problem, helping people in the process and getting paid? OO says that the incentive is that you are negative against the company and that's why you're hacking them. I think this is completely asserted. For the vast majority of people, it's just a profit incentive to do money with the amount of skills that you have. Sure, some unique bad actors can still do this if they're malicious. The problem is they never reveal themselves, because why would you reveal yourself if you're hacking for a malicious purpose? Because on their side, they can just do that damage anyway. But on our side, if they reveal themselves and then proceed to like leave a backdoor or leave some kind of damage, well, they've given their identity and their face to the company that they're damaging in the first place. That's a huge amount of risk. I don't know why any sane hacker would ever do that. So I think malicious actors are out of this debate. They don't take advantage of this. So I think, and I explained to you why it's likely the vast majority of people in tech are already just people who are are out of a job who would like want to do good but just don't have the ability to, because things like AI, things like advancements in technology lower the amount of jobs that are present in these markets to begin with. So you just have a lot of desperate people who are trying to make money and trying to make their way in the world some way. We give them a legal way to do that. I think that's pretty cool. The harm they claim happens then is that you leave a backdoor. You don't actually fix the problem. 3 reasons that this just would never actually happen. The first one is that legal protections go both ways. So oftentimes you must provide proof that you actually solve the job or fix the problem, and there are regulators and people to litigate this sort of thing. That's why contractors, for example, can just say they'll do the work and then not do the work. Obviously, there's some kind of verification. But secondly, any sane company is going to verify the work that their contractors do. So if a hacker comes up to you and says, hey, I found a problem in your login page, let me fix it for you. Well, yeah, once they're done with that job, you're going to send your own guys in there to make sure they fix the problem. You're going to ask for documentation on how they fix the problem so you can fix similar problems. I think it's just completely unstable to say there's some random guy hiding in a basement who you give full access to your files to and let them do whatever the fuck they want with it. That's just clearly not how it works, and no company would ever allow that. But thirdly, leaving a back door or doing some kind of bad action jeopardizes your immunity and jeopardizes your legality. And Liz explained to you why these hackers care so much of having a legal and safe way to do what they do, because that's the point at which you can look your family in the eye and say, I'm doing a legal, useful job and still getting paid for it. That's the point at which you can be guaranteed you're not going to get sued into next week for doing your job. That's the point at which you can guarantee food on the table and still being able to do what you can do, even if you can't access an industry job. So for all those reasons, I just don't think that these people are going to actively harm the company. In the majority of instances, I've proven that quite cleanly. So the second thing they say then is that more people will start hacking and they will find backdoors or find vulnerabilities that wouldn't have been found otherwise. Think for a second. Why wouldn't they be found otherwise if the coercive intention to hack and get data and sell it for money still exists? The same amount of hackers exist in either world. They find the same data breaches in either world. The question is, do they exploit those data breaches, or do they actually give them to the company and fix those data breaches? That's the argument that we're making, that on our side of the house, we create the necessary incentive structure to switch the action these people do when they find the problems. More on that a little later. First, though, I'll take a POI from CO if they have one. 2, 1.
Oh,
Sure.
okay.
So understand, your claim is those people with CS degrees who are hacking because they can't get jobs.
Yep. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is the claim. I'm glad you listened to my speech. Great. So the counterfactual we explain is that when you find like these breaches in the first place, there is a huge incentive on their side of the house for these people to just actually go and exploit those data breaches instead, because you're already in their system and you're hacking the group to steal your data and exploit vulnerabilities. On their side of the house, if you try to gray hat, there's a huge incentive for this company to screw you over, because these things aren't always legalized. So even if they let you fix the problem, they just sue you afterwards or do something to you afterwards. And there's no guarantee protection on your side because you were engaging in illegal activity to begin with. There's a profit incentive that always stands, and also because it's usually quite difficult to track or prosecute hackers in this way, you feel some kind of safety blanket. It's not an amazing safety blanket, but it's enough for you to justify to yourself that you're going to hack in either case. But on our side, we change their behavior, obviously because of the risk of being caught, but also because now there's a chance at a stable, lucrative job or an ability to actually get the same amount of profit for doing a good thing instead. We explain to you why companies are actually likely to pay you a lot of money for this, because the potential cost of having that breach open is a huge amount. So there's likely a lot of incentives for you to actually go to the company in our world when you have legal protections. But secondly, you can freely talk about your job and just get the peace of mind of not being sued into next week whenever it's the case that you do something. Why does this matter so much? First, because it provides a stable source of income and protection for these people who otherwise don't have those protections, which is what causes them to go into the negative criminal side of things anyway. But secondly, this hugely changes the amount of criminal acts that occur when it comes to data breaches, because every single instance in which a breach happens can go one of two ways, either to a gray hat fix or to a data breach. And we explain to you why we shift the pendulum in every single instance, saving lives in the process. So that's the last part of this speech. Why increased cybersecurity is so important. Why do data breaches and vulnerabilities have hugely damaging outcomes all the time? Well, all companies are vulnerable to them, because even if you hire a huge IT team, it's really hard to specially address every single possibility, and hackers constantly evolve their methods to be more creative and more destructive. So there's no such world where you can stop all these things from happening, because hackers always have the perverse incentive to get ahead of companies and develop new processes. Our side uniquely fixed this because we create an incentive structure where it's better to fix the breach instead of exploit it. The normalization of this kind of hacking then makes it far more likely that you stop breaches before they become problems in the first place, that you find the vulnerabilities and you fix them instead of exploiting them. Why does this matter so much? Why is OG taking this debate? Because it's not just super rich companies that take a small hit. It's people's data and livelihoods, phone numbers, credit card information, info on vulnerable people, bank accounts, essential services and systems that hackers track with ransomware and try to take down, which hurts the people on the ground when they can't get out of it. This is how cyber theft and ID theft happen, through these breaches. At the point at which we change even one of these these breaches, we save millions of people's personal data from big companies being compromised. I think we actually activate on far more of a scale than that. This is a huge harm to the vast majority of people because, and this is true, especially for the worst off who can't afford like other kinds of cybersecurity checks or other kinds of like banking systems that protect them. These people lose their jobs, they lose their livelihoods, they lose the money in the bank and the food on the table because of a cyber from 3 countries away that they can't stop. We uniquely change the incentives, we uniquely protect these people. Proud to propose.
Thank Elo for that fine speech. To conclude top half, the Elo.
Firstly, can I just check if I'm audible?
You are audible.
Fantastic. Right, let me set up my timer and then I'll be ready to go. Okay. Camera doesn't work. Oh well. Right, I'll be ready to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, a couple of responses to OG, because I think some of them are just kind of ridiculous, right? Like, I think they tell us that, like, this is for some reason a really vulnerable group in society because, like, the IT sector's going downhill or something like this. A lot of sectors go downhill for some period of time until we build up the industry again. This does not then mean that we allow those professionals to go ahead and do illegal activities without other people's consent in the meantime until they can find another job. You give those people other mechanisms by which to survive in the meantime. For instance, either retraining, improving those industries, getting them on some sort of welfare, or like just providing some kind of other job in the meantime, right? I don't think that like allowing individuals to necessarily do something against somebody's consent is like an acceptable alternative. Also, they say, yes, how can you build a portfolio unless you actually do these things? Can I just suggest like building a portfolio on like a simulation company or offering the company some kind of like model by which you can like practice on against like other cyber technicians? I think like there are other mechanisms by which you can like show your worth. So to be clear, doing so by an illegal mechanism is just like not the only way in which you can do this, right? I think also they claim, yes, you can definitely earn money from this and it'll save your livelihood. I think as per their own mech, this now gives companies the capacity to be like, but we don't want your help and you've now revealed yourself. Cool. So worst case scenario then, these people are putting a lot of work into hacking a company, even out of goodwill, and they still don't get any money because that company may not want them specifically to fix the problem. They may want to hire somebody else. At which point you've wasted a lot of time trying to hack a company for your own personal gain and then getting nothing out of it. At which point they don't even guarantee that they're even benefiting the groups that they want to benefit, right? I think given that like there's such a lack of certainty from OG on this, I don't think that they take this clash. Cool. Let me move in further to like reinforce the case on why like necessarily no thank you OG on why encouraging other hackers or to like other people to have unauthorized access is just like necessarily a bad thing. As per the info side, this grey hacking is pretty uncommon in status quo. Let me tell you why. Because the law literally exists as a deterrent for hacking in general, right? Like, most people don't do these things in status quo, such as hacking for both malicious or good intent, whatever that may be, because they know that there are consequences to their actions, e.g. being sued or going to prison. The thing is, these consequences might not happen to you as a hacker, right? But when they do happen, they are pretty severe, meaning that you then don't go ahead and do all of these things, right? I think the question here is like, how do you legitimately prove that somebody is a grey hacker if they're just trying to get past your firewalls, right? I think, to be honest with you, if you find somebody who's trying to get past your firewalls or who's trying to hack into your company, given that they haven't actually necessarily found anything yet, they have a very good like get out of jail free card in terms of saying, but I was just trying to grey hack, right? At which point what happens is when these hackers have no real sort of like deterrent or no real punishment for what it is that they're trying to do, whether that be malicious or non-malicious at all, you then just get more people trying to hack because they understand that they have some kind of level of excuse that they can use whilst they are still in the process if they ever get caught. This then means that if you're going to do something for malicious purposes, you might as well give it a shot, right? Because like, why wouldn't you? Because at this point, there's just like very little mechanisms by which people can actually hurt you unless you then go ahead and sell somebody's data, right? So I think like the problem here is why significantly more hackers are an issue, right? I think substantial amounts of hackers are going to necessarily cause systems overload, and like this necessarily makes systems more vulnerable for people to then hack. In status quo, this amount is pretty small because most people are scared of legal consequences. At the point at which you remove any legal consequences from attempting to hack, this just again gives people the incentive in unprecedented and unexpected amounts to try and hack people's systems. No, all companies do not have the capacity to try and protect against like international level attacks, right? Because they don't expect this, because they understand that there's legal protections for them, right? To the point where there are no legal protections, because like 10 people can now say that they're all trying to grey hack. 10 people is like pretty significant. Or if like people mobilize and do this in like very large amounts, this is going to be pretty harmful to your company. Why is this harmful in a few ways, right? I think, look, at the very most basic level, when you give your sensitive data to a company, you do not consent into other individuals seeing it unless they are employed by that company. No, OG. I think this is just like pretty basic mechanisms, right? I think at the very least, the people who are giving their information to these companies are being harmed inadvertently just because they're having their private information being shown to people who they do not consent into seeing it, right? This is an unjustifiable harm. Like, look, if I owned a shop, just because the back door of my shop is like broken in some way or is pretty weak, that does not then give somebody the right to try and break in, even if their intent is to break in and go, you should probably reinforce your back door a little bit better. Like, this is still an inadvertent breach of my privacy because I haven't allowed that person into my house or into my shop to walk around, move things about, see if things are broken, because I might have other plans to try and get that sorted out at some other point, or just in general, I deserve to have that level of privacy over something which is my property and which belongs to me, right? I think, like, given that this is just like an injustifiable harm within the first place, I think this is like principally wrong. But also just like, secondly, yeah, I think more and more people on hacking puts more pressure on systems. I'll take a POI from closing if they have one. 3, 2,
Okay, yeah.
1.
So,
Oh.
like, ultimately, you're basically just defending like black hat hacking, right? You're talking about black hat hacking. I think on your side, right? I don't see people. I don't see hackers like applying for like employment insurance or the gov shelling out limited funds to help them, right?
I just don't think that this is like true in any capacity. I think like any kind of deterrent that you can have against people hacking in general is probably a good thing in and of itself, right? I think if companies really genuinely want to like support their security systems, then they can probably just hire people to like consensually do so, because they know that there's not like a huge number of people trying to break into their systems at once. You can do these things with like dummy systems. The main bottom line here is like, if you don't consent into this, that doesn't then mean that you can give somebody a defense into trying to hack you in the first place, right? I think like giving anybody an opt-out out of being persecuted if they have like potential malicious intent is not a good thing in general. Look, I think also just if you're going to hack something in the first place, this then just gives you more capacity to try and decide what to do with the information, right? So like if you're a hacker, you have every reason now to go into a system and go, okay, I found some sensitive data. I could now sell this, or I could try and like maybe offer the company my services in order to fix it. I think the fact that you now have this choice when you didn't before is necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, right? I think overall, the harms on our side of the house are like insanely high. I don't think Gov can prove that any level of emotional protections for these people is like necessarily a good thing when there are other ways in which you can get employed, when there are other ways that you can protect your emotional health, other ways that you can be employed by cybersecurity. I don't think they prove that this is unique.
I thank the DLO to choose one half member.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Yep, we can hear you. Oh, thank you. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Well, I think opening government does a really good job of taking down the ridiculous opening opposition claim that these hackers are going to leave back doors in these companies after they have already offered to fix these sorts of things. I think opening government is severely lacking in their characterization of the actual way in which gray hat hacking works and how this actually gives gray hat hackers a unique mechanism of leverage that allows them to increase their profits, which drives more people into this industry. We're not going to mechanize that better than opening government, but then we're also specifically going to weigh the specific types of hackers we turn gray now and why we're able to extract the most amount of benefit by turning those hackers gray. The first thing I'm going to do is do a bit of actor analysis, which is going to implicitly refute opening opposition. Opening opposition's counterfactual is that hackers, after of gray hat hacking, return to white hat hacking, where they like make agreements with these sorts of companies and like to get maximum amount of profit. The first thing I have to respond to this is it's so good. No one would gray hat hack on either side of the house in the status quo. Presumably, there wouldn't be any sort of gray hat hackers because it's always easier to turn to a more reliable, like established market to actually make contracts with companies to do so, right? The problem, I think, for why there exists gray hat hackers in the status quo is they don't want to deal with companies. And there are a few structural reasons for why. First, they have no leverage in this. Insofar as you're proactively telling the company, hey, I want to work with you to actually identify your vulnerabilities, but then I don't get any sort of leverage to say how much you're able to pay me. You're just going to pay me however money you want. You're basically becoming an employee of that company and you're forced to accept whatever wage that company gives to you. The reason for why this leads to a lot of asymmetric payment is the company is massive, right? They have a lot more leverage over you who's just a single white hat hacker, especially if you buy the characterization opening that this market is extremely oversaturated. I think a lot of people go into the white hat market because they split people, which means that your labor obviously cannot be valued as highly because they can always turn to alternatives to make far more money, asymmetric balance within the status quo. The people who can not open the opposition to start hacking, which is actually malicious companies pay ransom for like stealing their data and things like that. That is the only way to maximize the profit in the current status quo without these sorts of regulations. Why then, with these regulations, do people turn to gray hat hacking instead of black hat hacking? And this is the clearest counterfactual margin that CG is going to prove. I don't think it's the publicity thing that like opening government says, because obviously this is out of the scope of the motion. I think is correct to point out. Like this is like the hacker does. They have to have some sort of leverage. They're not going to reveal themselves to the market. They're going to hack first and then ask for this payment later. But it's also not the risk of failure thing that Liz says, because I think obviously like the world of hacking is very, very like covert and discreet. Obviously, the most talented hackers, the ones who are most likely to opt into these sort of black hat markets are the ones who are most talented and most able to cover their tracks to anonymize their online activity, which makes it very difficult for them to actually be detected. So the unique mechanism as to why exactly people are more likely to now turn to gray hacking on our side of the house is because the non-consenting aspect of their hacking gives them leverage over the company. The company now must pay you specifically what you demand, and you have far more negotiating power over that sort of demanding because they cannot turn into another hacker in the market because only you are aware of the vulnerability. Only you, this specific gray hat hacker, is aware of the specific vulnerability and can offer the ways to patch that sort of vulnerability. Here are the reasons why you're able to profit more off of these regulations. Firstly, obviously, with legal immunity, you can avoid the costly legal fees, which not only incur great monetary costs, but also a massive opportunity time cost, insofar as when you go to courts and things like that, you cannot do more hacking and gain more profit. Secondarily, I think the core process itself, the discovery process, means you're very vulnerable to having your other hacks uncovered, which can compound the effect of things like punishment and things like that. And it's obviously terrible. But also, if you just get thrown into jail or you incur massive fines, it's going to set back your gray hat hacking career massively. But the most and third mechanism here that is really, really crucial is arbitration, right? Courts are fairer determinants of how much weightage you're actually able to get, and you're able to allow the courts to be able to utilize that leverage at the point at which you are now able to use an arbitrary third party to determine this. It is not just a consensual like agreement between the company and you as it is within white hat hacking within the status quo. Here are three reasons why courts are fairer determinants. They may understand the value of protecting data far more than the companies themselves. Insofar the companies might have to make a cost-benefit analysis. Oh, well, protecting this data is going to cost me a lot. But courts care about social welfare. They care about people not losing like their credit card information or their passports or sorry, their passwords, which are really, really detrimental to like social welfare. So obviously the government welfare here has a greater consideration than the private welfare that the corporations may only be cognizant of. But the second reason is obviously just having a third party is like less biased. The company is not going to want to pay you as much because that cuts into their profit. The court can necessarily order the company to pay you far more. For all of these reasons, the greater amount of profit that these gray hat hackers are now able to unlock under our side of the house nudges more of them into this productive area of hacking instead of nudging them into black hat or far more perverse ways of hacking. Let's weigh this against opening government. We're going to specifically explain why the types of hackers we turn gray now unlock such greater margin. First of all, these are probably likely to be the most talented, who feel like their skills are being underpaid and underutilized in the status quo. If they've lost their job from IT oversaturation of the market, but they have like a super good CS degree from like Harvard or Stanford or something, they probably want to be able to use that in a productive way. We offer them a more productive avenue to use that in a way that's going to help these companies patch their vulnerabilities instead of leading to like things like the Yahoo password leak, which lost like a billion people's like personal information and privacy. Secondarily, I think a lot of these hackers are the ones who oftentimes are going to have the most amount of capital or the capability to help the largest companies be able to patch their vulnerability. But this inherently also means they have to incur a large upfront capital cost with all of the massive servers and computer equipment that they necessarily need to ensure, like all the fancy equipment they need to ensure that this hacking, like the fixing of these vulnerabilities goes successfully. So those are the people who necessarily need a greater margin of profit to be willing to work in the gray hat hacking sector. We unlock all of those people, capture all of those people, and make them far more likely to help the company rather than do detrimental things towards the company. I'll take OO.
Most people in general do not turn to hacking companies. Shifting the Overton window into acceptance of hacking in general is bad, in the same way that we probably shouldn't normalize stealing, even if it comes out to a good result.
But the way in which hacking is done now actually benefits the company. It protects against future vulnerabilities, and this is also far better than the comparative, which we proved, where you get way more worse black hat hacking. Obviously, these people who are driven out of the IT sector are still going to try to benefit or profit from their hacking talents. Just on our side, they help you do it in a far more productive way. The way in which then this weighs over opening government is we explain why these types of people are most likely to have the most greatest benefits to these companies. If these are extremely talented people who have the greatest capability to help these sorts of companies, then we're able to help the largest companies patch the greatest amount of vulnerabilities. This matters because these largest companies oftentimes have the most complex computer systems and they are more susceptible to these massive amounts of vulnerabilities, but they also house the greatest amounts of data. So Yahoo or Microsoft losing their data and having that breach is terrible for millions of people. We are able to help the amount of people. We unlock the greatest skill in terms of magnitude. Very proud to propose.
I thank member of Gov. Moving on to member.
Can everyone hear me all right?
Yep.
Awesome. POIs in the chat, please. I will try to take opening around 5. Is anybody not ready? Cool. Fact. There is a small pool of people with the skills for finding vulnerabilities in relevant websites that have lots of information made by big firms. Another fact. This group is distinct from hackers as a whole, and all these people should and want to get jobs in white hat cybersecurity. And by the info slide, most of these people already do. Now, here is the problem. When you legalize gray hat hacking, you causes firms to have less in-house cybersecurity, so they hire less white hat hackers, and to have less white hats who want to do that job because more of them are in gray hat firms. We're going to argue that this is bad for cybersecurity at large. But some characterization. I want to note there's been a lack of clarity about who these gray hat hackers are. Every relevant gray hat hacker is not poor, is not having trouble finding a job, even if cybersecurity is going down right now. These people overwhelmingly are wealthy, probably went to first world countries, and probably went to good universities. Why is that? In order to find vulnerabilities that are relevant and give them access to data, they have to beat the in-house white hat firms of massive corporations. The number of people who are so naturally genius, they can teach themselves to do that despite poverty, despite not going to university, is incredibly small. Consequently, the relevant pool of people is small and relatively privileged. Now, these people, as a consequence, are largely going to be diverted from being white hat hackers. One, OG gave you a lot of arguments for this already. They said you really would rather be legal, all things considered. Exactly. That's why you won't be a black hat. Two, you probably live in the US, not say Kazakhstan where there aren't effective courts. You know the government is going to find you. Third, there's a sorting mechanism. Read the info slide and listen to OG's arguments. They say there's going to be licensing. These people are willing to come forward and give their identities. If they were willing to do it in the first place, they wouldn't have turned to black hat hunting. And fourth, just on pure numbers, there's big deterrence. I don't think the vast majority of people who will be willing to do legal gray hat hacking would also be willing to do black hat hacking. But to the extent that people would have do black hat hacking otherwise, I think the difference is dramatically overstated by the other debaters. Why? What do black hat adders actually know how to do? They know how to find vulnerabilities, but they are not experts in blackmail. They are not experts in fraud, especially if they're the kind of people who would have done gray hat hacking otherwise. The consequence is what these people do is they are the ones blackmailing themselves. Rather, they sell on something called a zero-day market, and they say, pay this amount of money in Bitcoin, I will tell you how the vulnerability works. Firms, especially big firms, obviously are scouting these markets constantly and buy the data vulnerabilities defensively for the exact reasons why they don't want them to go out. But note, these markets have really strong norms because, one, the markets rely on certainty. Everyone on these markets know that if they fuck something up, then they aren't going to be able to sell anymore, so everyone has to do what they say they're going to do. But second, they use zero trust mechanisms. They use algorithms that work even if everyone's a liar. They're complicated, but I study algorithmic CS. I promise you these exist. This means that not only the prices on these real, but the benefits from involving licensing a course is limited because everyone's collectively got together and made black hat hacking work surprisingly well. So what does this do to the debate? One, it levels OG's case because they presume the gray hats are otherwise going to be black hats, and they assume that black hats are essentially all identity theft. And yes, a lot of them are identity theft, but the ones who will be deferred into the gray hat are the ones selling on zero-day markets, not the ones doing blackmail. Second, this reduces the scope of OO's impacts because it indicates the vulnerabilities they care about are rarely sold to blackmailers and are almost always sold back to the firm, so the contribution to the impact is relatively small. For CG, I'm just going to straight flip their impact. So, resilience on external cybersecurity through external contractors like gray hats is way worse than internal cybersecurity, and by CG's own case, this diverts personnel and this diverts funds. 3 structural reasons. First, there is better incentives to get work done, i.e., when you're an external contractor, you want to sell more, whereas you're internal, you want to get the job done right. The easy analogy is when you're fixing your own car, you want to make sure your car is fixed as well as possible. But if you're a mechanic, you want to fix it precisely well enough that you don't get sued, but not so well it doesn't break again later. So if it breaks again later, you get more business. This means that gray hat hackers have worse incentives than people inside their own company. Second structural reason, capacity. Look, knowing how to find vulnerabilities does not mean you know how to fix them easily. It is especially important to need long-term knowledge of the product, especially when these have literally millions of lines of code, probably in multiple languages, and when there's integration, you have to do stress testing and things like that. The consequence of all of this is that black hat hackers often aren't able to fix things well. I'll take the POI from opening.
So obviously these gray hat hackers would otherwise be black hat hackers because they develop skills similar to black hat hacking. They cannot simply transfer out from white hat hacking.
They could just get a white hat hacking job. I don't know. Third structural reason, dependency. When you rely on external contractors, that gives them too much influence over you. Even if they're the best incentives, and we'll assume that, they might decide they want to get another job, and now your firm is fucked. There might be international regulations that prevent you from paying them to another country, and now your firm is fucked. This is bad. Fourth, and most importantly, really star this in your notes, is moral hazard. Firms are going to get complacent. The problem with the tech industry is tech cycles get faster and faster because everyone wants to be the first mover because everyone knows how to write the programs. So the way you get market share is being the one who releases that program as first. This means you often have a lot of companies where everyone is wearing like 80 different hats. There's a lot of speed to get things out fast. There's a lot of pressure, and things are really complex, and things often don't get checked, and you have some intern who's probably using ChatGPT for all you know. Consequently, it's really easy to think, maybe we can cut down on cybersecurity and save some money because we can hire gray hats to find it anyways. This won't happen in every instance, but let's be real, it will happen in some of them, and this will lead the companies as a whole being more complacent. What's the weighing on this? This isn't just that we do worse cybersecurity and more acts happen. It's that vulnerabilities are caught much more often before release, i.e., you have more integration earlier in the process. This is important because if you catch it before you release the product, nobody is harmed. There's no risk that a blackmailer gets it. There's no risk that the wrong person buys in the zero-day market. It probably is cheaper for you as a corporation. By contrast, when you're relying on gray hat hackers, you have to release it first, or at least you're substantially likely to have it released by the time you're doing most of this debugging, since you don't want to give them access to your source code by OG's own arguments. The consequence of this is that you're much more likely to have a bad person and a black hat hacker find it first, and that is how you get data breaches. Proud to oppose.
All right, sorry. Thank the member of opposition for that speech to conclude the Gulf case.
Okay. Can everyone hear me, see me?
Yeah, we can hear it and see you.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I think we take this debate because I think OG makes the mistake of just thinking that these hackers are more like white hat hackers, right? That they have the skill set that they can now advertise these companies and present themselves to them before they even start hacking. But I think the op bench makes an even graver mistake in that they just assume all hackers are inherently super malicious and they have a large amounts of leverage, right? So I think you guys are talking about white hat and black hat. So I think the reason why David takes this is because he accurately characterizes who these great hat hackers are, and ultimately why on our side we're likely to push them towards the direction of becoming more like white hat hackers and less into directions that they can easily sway into in becoming black hat hackers. I'm going to do a few things. I'm going to talk about OO, and I'm basically going to talk about how we beat OG's rep to them and about how ultimately CO is just like wrong. Okay, so firstly on OO chats about how like these companies, these hackers have huge amounts of leverage, right? And how they're inherently very malicious. And ultimately when the state sanctions like, okay, go ahead, go off, it's just a big catalyst for more people to do malicious hacking. And I'm just going to characterize like even black hat hacking, right? It's not these millions of dollars that you're paying out, right? I literally read an article like 2 weeks ago about Ticketmaster, right? Who was like literally extorted by a black hat hacking company. And like I'm all for extorting Ticketmaster. They really ripped me off for those Taylor Swift tickets. But I'm saying like you're not paying out millions, right? I think instead these companies, these huge giants who literally have industry monopolies like Live Nation, right, are able to shell out like $500,000 to these black hat companies. But I think Rahul points this out fairly, right? Broski has a Princeton Eng degree getting there, right? So I think he says to you, this industry is literally failing, right? AI is coming for you, right? All these people want comp sci degrees. This is why it's so hard to apply for these majors these days, right? And it's very hard to beat out the competition, right? And DLO assumes this and they just say, oh, okay, even if the industry fails, you're just going to wait it out a few years, maybe rely on the government, find some alternative jobs and stuff like that. But I'm saying great hat hacking literally is the alternative, right? It is the alternative to give these people agency, to give them some sort of job security without them compromising their integrity and turning into black hat hacking, which OO makes the mistake of like mixing up with just normal gray hat hacking, right? I just think in general, but always like kind of pushes on this, saying that it's difficult to tell, right? There's no real punishment or deterrence, and like if you get legal immunity, it's fuzzy. But I think immunity likely comes as a caveat, right? You can't just like do no work and just be like, haha, give me immunity. I won't give you any proof that I helped them at all, right? Likely, this big ass fucking company will come after you, right? And the fact that you haven't actually done any work. I just think this is like a very naive point for them to run. But I think what David tells you is that on our side, we get way more negotiating power because you have very niche skills. And note that, like, okay, obviously the companies are going to want to like hire white hat hacking. They're going to have internal consulting, stuff like that, right? But obviously, you like coding and stuff like isn't inherently like really easy peasy lemon squeezy. It's not like you just work at McKinsey and just make slideshows all day, right? I think like finding out like what kind of bugs are in there, right, and debugging and going through lines of code, right, are very niche skills. Ultimately, there's a bit of luck involved. There's also like it's also just like inherently difficult because companies can make mistakes coding in the first place, right? Okay, so I think moreover, right, these companies these hackers have lots of profit incentive, right? They're not inherently malicious. I'll take over in a second, but moreover, they're probably just desperate and like in need of money. And I think even if more people turn to hacking in general, whether like gray hat hacking, that's okay, because the comparative is that people will turn into black hat hacking because the incentive and the need to get money, get a job, get sense of self is still there, right? So I think I'm just going to be very charitable, even if these gray hat hackers want to fuck over the company a little bit. And I think on our side, they still get that power rush of saying, hey, I caught your mistakes, like I'm just a lowly person, but I have some sort of minute amounts of leverage over this person. I think we can better respond to these people and hold these people more accountable once there's legal defense mechanisms from both sides. Just like as an intuition pump, the line between like violent, peaceful protesting and like let's say lobbying and negotiations are very thin, right? But these people ultimately have a lot of the same incentives incentives, right? It's just about how you get there, right? So I think ultimately we're going to push these people down to doing something peacefully, right? Because we can't change the incentive and the need they have for it. Okay, before I go into that,
Yeah, sure. So do the people who have given their sensitive data to companies also consent to an endless amount of hackers, regardless of intent? At least with black hat hackers, you know that they're going to face consequences for potentially stealing your medical data, your address,
okay.
all of these things.
I don't think the companies are really any better, right? They're also the ones selling data to like all these advertisers, doing things that we like go like God knows what they do with this. Is why everyone has fucking VPNs, right? Like I'm saying, like there's untrustworthy parties from either side. I think you'd rather catch these mistakes from the get-go, catch, these like data breaches and stuff like that before they happen, and therefore I think you're going to be protected from the start. Okay, so a CEO tells me a few things. They tell me that like gray hat hackers are rich, they're likely got good degrees and stuff like that, but if they are, then like there's no need to gray hat, right? They can just be hired as white hat like workers in corporations and stuff like that. If they suddenly have this need to like be malicious and stuff, that's just black hat hacking, right? So I think gray hat hackers often discover vulnerabilities that white hat hackers can't, right? Because I think ultimately, if you're paid by a company, right, if you have this shield, right, you're often like biased in some way. You probably can't catch all these mistakes and you probably slip up in some ways, right? Gray hat hackers, right, they need to be paid more. They're more motivated. Maybe there's a little bit of luck involved, stuff like that. But I think what's more important is that gray hat hackers likely also need to compete with black hat hacking, right? So I think they need to differentiate themselves meaningfully and actually prove to these companies, hey, okay, I'm not out to get you. I genuinely just see that you have this problem, right? They're probably going to negotiate and approach businesses not as antagonistically because, if two people find the same mistake, a business is going to go to the one that isn't like openly extorting them, right? So I think that there's also this incentive to differentiate yourself from the bad side of the industry and actually like, show yourself as someone who is not as antagonistic. Generally, I think we beat OG for a few reasons. I think we have better mechs as to why regulation is actually effective and how like it gives gray hat hackers a lot more leverage. I think David actually weighs the impact for you because he tells you that these talented and like capital intensive hackers actually need to be turned to gray hat hacking instead of the counterfactual where they're pushed to black hat hacking. And finally, I think that we're more charitable because we admit that these companies might have to pay out big sums, but we actually flip OO when we prove that it's worth flipping these that the trade-off is worth it because it prevents you from becoming a black hat hacker. Very proud to propose.
Thank the Go Flip to close off this wonderful debate.
For POIs, can you raise your hand? Like the emoji is fine. You don't have to like turn on your camera. I mean, the problem with this debate is that no other team understands what cybersecurity is. It's not IT, not all CS majors go into cybersecurity, and it has nothing to do with debugging. Let's talk about white hat hackers, black hat hackers, and gray hat hackers. They are all doing exactly the same job. The only difference is that white hat hackers are employed inside of companies, so it is totally legal for them to enter their network. It is a purely moral delineation, not a job description difference. That is why it is reasonable to say that any gray hat hacker could at any time have chosen to become a white hat hacker, or any black hat hacker to become a white hat hacker, etc. All right. Our case is really simple. This is not about whether or not we will find vulnerabilities, because there are going to be the same number of hackers in the system in either world. This is about a constant global struggle of workers' rights against the company's bottom line. Destroying departments and turning previously internal positions into external contracts is nothing but an excuse by multi-billion-dollar companies to deny job security, basic benefits like pensions or healthcare, and other basic worker rights to the average person. That is precisely what happens when the use of licensed gray hat hackers becomes norm. Cybersecurity professionals who are currently working in an industry which gives them good employment get laid off and cannot pay their rent, they cannot pay their mortgages, and they cannot feed their families. They are forced then to turn to the gray hat hacking themselves. That is what unlocks all of our opening house argumentation. There are very few gray hat hackers in the status quo by the admission of the entire government bench because they have jobs right now. What government does is take away that job security. That's how you cause the collapse of the computer science industry. But that's not all. When hackers are gray hat, they have an incentive to allow vulnerabilities to go to market. Even if you still keep your job, and are working as a cybersecurity professional inside of a company, you have no incentive to update the processes to ensure necessary cybersecurity things as those processes become more updated, as people discover new ways to make sure they're great, because you can later find and patch these vulnerabilities. This is the basic problem with paying people by commission versus paying them a salary, because it saves companies money, but then people don't make enough money. So now in order to have their previous lifestyle, they have to find new ways in order to make money. Go ahead, Rahul.
Yeah. Firms obviously won't replace their in-house teams for the exact reasons you give. They want to avoid expensive commissions and therefore have their own thing. We prove why you never stop all the breaches. In those cases, we fix the problem by incentivizing gray hat hackers where your own in-house teams would fail. That's the difference.
Your argument is that people will not replace their in-house people because it is cheaper to have people in-house than it is to have gray hat hackers. By that argument, then even if you pass this policy, then nothing will change, which means that there simply is no debate. Obviously, it is cheaper to have contractors than to have people inside your company. This is why freelancing exists. This is why contracting work exists in almost every industry in the status quo. Let's talk about opening government, which is the team that probably most does not understand cybersecurity. Let's first talk about the CS sector. They say the CS sector is losing jobs. Yes, this is true. The CS sector as a whole is generally having less and less job opportunities, but cybersecurity is not the entire CS sector. Cybersecurity as a matter is one of the few parts of the CS industry that is growing. Why is this true? First, because there are many more software releases on faster schedules because of consumer demand and larger amounts of investment. But secondly, because of international conflict, especially between the US, Russia, and China, where many governments are funding cybersecurity at the present moment. This means that their argumentation is not true. Their only real positive reason as to why cybersecurity is not a good place to get a job is that is AI. But the problem is that AIs are just large language models. They're language prediction. They cannot just do hacking because there's a lack of training data. How do you train an AI to hack into a company's network? I do not understand, because people are not publishing all the things that they do, and it's also not just code, right? You have to physically go into there and do things and think about those things. Right now, anyways, their main argument then is that we will encourage black hat hackers to become gray hat hackers in their world. No, because first of all, no existing black hat hacker can go mainstream or go legal because they have already committed crimes. So they have to hide their identity or they will risk being found out, which means that it is extremely unlikely that we see career switches in that direction. The only way it is possible to switch your career is from white hat hacking to gray hat hacking once that becomes legal. That's what's actually possible, and that's why our case is going to be significantly more likely than theirs. But secondly, let's give them their best case, which is probably the only case in which this is possible. Is a young brand new hacker who is deciding what kind of hat to put on, right? I find it extremely unlikely that many in the status quo choose anything but white hat hacking. That is because by their own admission, no one wants to become a criminal. This is why there are not many black or gray hat hackers in the status quo. This interacts with opening opposition's argument, right? There are not tens of dozens of black hat hackers attacking your software because they don't exist. It's a relatively rare profession because it is just easier for you to get a straight and legit job. The vast majority of people who choose to become black hat hackers are going to do so anyways because they have other incentives. For example, most of them are social activists, right? So weigh this argument. Their best case is a super, super small number of people who are probably going to choose black hat hacking either way. Almost every hacker is already legal. They don't have a case. In regards to breach of consent, I just think this principle is untrue. You know that you're breaking the law, which means that we're not breaching your consent. If anything, you're breaking the company's consent by going through their shit. Let's talk about opening opposition. Opening opposition is missing scope and likelihood. They say hackers will steal your data or engage in fraudulent activities. Let's weigh this. This is a very small number of cases because most of the policy passed is intelligent, so they will require you to document all of your actions so fraudulent actions are impossible. This is because discovering a vulnerability can be hard, but seeing if it is still there once they tell you what it is not hard at all. You probably don't become eligible for amnesty anyways if you don't find the vulnerability. So you can't just lie and say that you're hacking and you're just being gray hat hacking because you haven't found a vulnerability in the first place. Let's weigh against them. Even if opening opposition is correct, we provide the necessary prerequisite by proving that it is only in government side that gray hat hackers actually exist. Our characterization is just much more realistic than theirs. Only in government side do hackers have an incentive to create and to let live vulnerabilities that they are aware of because they have an incentive to make themselves more money. That's how we actually unlock opening opposition's argument. Let's talk about closing government. Closing government thinks that freelancing is going to make you rich. Cybersecurity professionals, they say, are being exploited and don't make enough money. This is not true. The average wage for cybersecurity professionals is over 6 figures. They say by their own admission that these are probably people who are from Harvard or Stanford who have major CS degrees. This means that even if they are being underpaid, none of them are prone to crime because they have useful degrees that can get them jobs in other sectors in computer science. Like, I don't know, become a project manager or a software engineer or literally anything else instead of literally ruining your life and probably sending yourself to jail within a span of 15 years. But let's give them their best case. Even if it's true that you're going to turn to crime, gray hat hacking does not solve because doesn't make you more money because you'll just have competition against other gray hat hackers, which means you probably get market rate anyways. Which is it? Do you have bargaining power or not? If there are the same number of hackers, then you have the same amount of bargaining power.
Thank Opwit for that speech, and thank everyone for a cool debate. Please leave the room.